I didn't know what success was, but I knew we wouldn't fail.
Andy Murray, how on earth did you get him to invest?
With difficulty is the short answer. The desire to be a British equivalent alternative to Nike or Adidas, the desire to be a challenger to those guys really is instilled throughout the business. I don't know if we'll get there, but it's great fun trying to get there. The goal was always, let's absorb as much knowledge as we can from the city, from all these great businesses that you get to meet, so that we can apply that knowledge to starting our own business.
Hello and welcome to another edition of City AM's Boardroom Uncovered with me, Jon Robinson. My guest for this episode is Tom Beahon, the Chief Executive of Castor. Tom co-founded the brand with his brother Phil and has since signed up Sir Andy Murray as an investor, with the company now worth in the region of £1 billion. Castor's logo has become a familiar sight for sports fans in recent years. But how did two Merseyside brothers create one of the UK's fastest growing companies? And can this undoubted British success story achieve its stated aim to become this country's answer to Nike? Without any further delay, let's dive in. Well, Tom, thank you very much for coming on Boardroom Uncovered. It's great to have you.
Thank you for having me.
I think there's only one place to start, really, and that's Andy Murray. Sir Andy Murray, he's an early backer of Castor, the face of the brand in some ways, especially in the early days. How on earth did you get him to invest?
With difficulty is the short answer. So the partnership with Andy, I think, was probably as close to perfect an example that you could get of entrepreneurial hustle. So I am a big believer in the maxim of the harder you work in life, the luckier you get. And working with Andy, it exemplifies that. So we'd started Castor, my brother and I. We'd created some product, which sounds really easy, but actually it's quite hard to do. We'd built a website, which sounds really easy and it's quite hard to do. We'd convinced some people to part with their hard-earned cash in return for our product, which is when you're starting out this big seminal moment. And we'd started to gain some traction. So we were still a small business, but growing quite nicely. We were profitable. Probably because of our Merseyside upbringing, we've both always had this mindset of you need to generate profit in order to be a real business. And that sounds really straightforward, right? But there's a lot of companies that, certainly back in 2016 when we started, had this mindset of raise cash, pump that cash into Facebook. Doesn't matter if you're acquiring customers profitably or unprofitably, just grow as quickly as you can and worry about profits down the line. And we never had that mindset. So we were growing nice and steadily, but we'd always had this ambition right from the beginning of wanting to be a global brand. So being very proud to be British, but wanting to be global, which most people thought was crazy. And I understand why they did, but to us at least, it made complete sense. And when you have that mindset, it actually became really straightforward to reverse engineer, okay, how do we become global? We need to have globally recognized athletes wearing our product on a global stage. So we thought about athletes that would fit our brand DNA. Better Never Stops, being a challenger brand. Andy embodies all of those characteristics perfectly. And we essentially gifted product to everyone around him. So his coach, his physio, his personal trainer, his masseur, his psychologist, all these guys and girls, so that Andy would just keep seeing the brand. Not particularly sophisticated, but, you know, I'm not sure they teach that at Harvard. But it worked. And he kept seeing this brand. Where the good luck point fits into it is he was coming to the end of his previous kit partnership. Kept seeing this new brand. Someone said, oh yeah, it's this British brand, two brothers. Obviously Andy with his brother Jamie become exceptionally successful as tennis players. So I think the brother angle probably helped us. And when we got introduced to him, it sounds really cliched, but it's completely true. There was just like an instant chemistry. So I can't speak for Andy, but very much I got the sense that he liked the fact we were young, British, had these big ambitions, weren't part of the status quo or Nike or Adidas, wanting to challenge the big guys. And once you've got that chemistry and natural affinity, the rest of it kind of flows quite naturally from there.
You mentioned Nike there. You said previously that you want Castor to become the UK's answer to Nike. How are you building your company into something that could potentially take them on a global scale? Because it's quite the claim, isn't it? You're not going to do that easily.
Who wants easy? You can't start a business. Well, some people can maybe, but I can't get out of bed at 5 o'clock every morning and travel at weekends and make the sacrifices that are required to be successful without having the potential for it to be really big. There's no right answer for everyone. Of course, some people are quite rightly very happy for their business to get to a certain level, but right from the beginning with Castore, we did want to be a global brand. And as I said previously, or as I said earlier, some people think you're crazy when you do that, but it's amazing to me how without having that ambition, you're definitely not going to get there. It doesn't mean that you're going to be successful because you've got the ambition, but having that big ambition is a really good starting point. So we've always had that desire to be a big, globally recognized brand, and that's driven our decision making throughout every stage of the journey. So whether it was a partnership with Andy Murray, whether it was making the decision to go into football and partner with big, globally recognized teams like Rangers or Newcastle, whether it was making a decision to expand across Europe probably earlier than other entrepreneurs or brands would have done, that big ambition, the desire to be a British equivalent alternative to Nike or Adidas, the desire to be a challenger to those guys really is instilled throughout the business and really drives the decision making. So I don't know if we'll get there, but it's great fun trying to get there. And for me, I couldn't do it any other way.
Of course, you're doing it hand in hand with your brother as well. We're recording this in the heart of the City of London, your old stomping ground. You know, you're originally from Merseyside, but you both had jobs down here and then decided to quit, move back to Merseyside and start Castore. What gave you the confidence to quit well-paid jobs to take that risk?
I think if you're an entrepreneur, it's just inside you. There's a deep, intense drive to control your own destiny. So I loved working in the city. I love working in finance. I learned so much. Like working in leverage finance, you would meet 10 different businesses a week. You'd meet 10 different CEOs a week. I was 21 years old. If you're interested in business, in my opinion, there's no better place to be to learn how do businesses compete, where do they sit in the market, how do they generate profits, how resilient are their revenues, where does it go wrong, why does it go wrong. I was a young guy and I was like a sponge. All of this stuff was just like, oh my word, what a privileged opportunity to learn from all of these amazing businesses and people. But there was never any doubt in my mind, and I know my brother was the same, that was always a finite period of our lives. The goal was always, let's absorb as much knowledge as we can from the city, from all these great businesses that you get to meet, so that we can apply that knowledge to starting our own business. So when we moved down here, I'm 3 years older than my brother, so I came down a little bit earlier. But right from the beginning, we lived together in a tiny flat, and we would wake up at 5 o'clock, talk about ideas for a business between 5:30 and 8:30, leave to go to work, get home at 6:30 at night, talk about business ideas again until 9:30 p.m, go to bed and then wake up and do it again. And again, a lot of people think that's crazy, but if you really want to do something, it's through that process of staying up later than other people, getting up earlier than other people. I think in Britain we often criticise it. Again, I say it slightly tongue-in-cheek, hustle culture. In America, it's championed. It's crazy to me how in sport, for example, we celebrate Tiger Woods, Michael Jordan, these great players that practice harder than anyone else, that work harder than anyone else, and are ultimately successful. Why would it not be the same in business? If you work harder, if you practice harder, if you make more sacrifices, it's very logical to my mind that you should be more successful. And it doesn't make a huge amount of sense to me that we don't seem to celebrate that in the UK. But the transition from working in the city to entrepreneurship, it was really natural because there was never going to be any other route.
I can imagine the harebrained schemes that you and your brother came up with at 5:30 in the morning and last thing at night.
I'll tell you one of them, John, which I was embarrassed about it at the time, and we've been lucky enough to have a bit of success now, so you can look back at these things with a smile. But I think I've been skiing twice in my life now. I'd been once at the time, and had this great idea to create an après-ski apparel brand. So all the cool clothes that people would wear when they're having a drink after having gone skiing. And my brother said to me, "That's a brilliant idea, aside from the fact that what the hell are you going to do for the 9 months of the year that people don't go skiing?" And I didn't have a great answer to that question, so we decided to move on to something else. But there's a few like that.
I bet there were. Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, Castore is a success story. By any metric it is. You've got big backers and you've got great brand recognition and also kit deals with huge sports teams and athletes across the world. But from 2016 up to first few years of Castore's life, did you ever think it might not survive?
No.
Why is that? Because of the strength of the idea or the backing that you had?
No, definitely not. Not the strength of the idea, not the backing. Just the tunnel vision required to literally create something out of nothing, which is what you're doing.
Most startups do fail, of course.
They do. And it's a logical right to believe that, well, I'm going to be different. It's a really strange balance between deep self-confidence and self-belief that I believe I can do this, but simultaneously being incredibly humble and recognizing I don't have a lot of skill sets required to make this thing successful. How can I meet people, bring people with me on the journey that can help fill the many gaps that I have? You need both of them, one without the other. Being humble without having self-belief doesn't work, and it absolutely wouldn't work in reverse either. So I remember right from the beginning when the revenue was tiny, I would check my phone every day to see how many products we'd sold that day. Had the amount of product sold that's gone out of the business been more than the amount of cash that had gone out of the business? And you're looking at that number every day, and if more cash is going out than what you're generating, life was not fun, and there was genuine fear deep in your stomach, and I don't think that ever leaves you, if I'm honest. But that old-fashioned saying of pressure can crack pipes or create diamonds, in my view, it's only when you're in an environment like that, success was the only option. And in my mind, I don't think I could define success, whether we would get revenue to a million or 10 million or 100 million or a billion. I didn't know what success was, but I knew we wouldn't fail.
We're talking of pressure. It's now time for those quickfire questions. Are you ready?
Absolutely.
First off, what was your first job?
Paperboy. So I was a paperboy, I think, at 12, 13 years old. So it's probably where the habit of getting up at 5 o'clock started to go and do that, and I've never lost it.
Who inspires you?
Steve Jobs is definitely my favourite entrepreneur. So reading his story and seeing how he built Apple has been a massive inspiration to me.
And you can't answer Andy Murray to this one, but if you had to appoint a celebrity to your board, who would it be and why?
Gareth Southgate.
Okay, why?
Is he a celebrity? Gareth Southgate is a celebrity. The focus on culture that he had with England football, I don't think he's had anywhere near the level of credit that he deserves for that. And I think over time he will get that. And I think he would add a lot of value to any business.
There we go, you heard it here first. What was the best thing about your job?
Being in control of your own destiny.
And if you weren't doing this, what would you do?
Probably be a paperboy. What would I do? I'd be a very mediocre golfer trying to be a professional golfer.
And finally, if you were Prime Minister for the day, what would you do?
Implement a flat income tax.
Okay. Talk to me more about that. Why is that?
I think we're, as a country, and I'm incredibly proud to be British, and I'm a massive believer in Britain, I think we're at risk of taking too many steps down a road of not wanting to celebrate risk takers and wealth creators and the only way that we'll stop going down that road is with very clear and decisive action. I'm not sure if a flattening rate of income tax will come anytime soon, but if that starts a conversation, then great.
What are your perceptions of the UK economy? We're quite a few months into the new Labour government, but not quite a year yet. What do you rate it?
I think it's hard to be overly positive in the actions taken by the government haven't necessarily matched the rhetoric that came pre them coming into power. So there was a lot of talk about growth, economic growth being the absolute central agenda item number one. I'm not sure the actions taken match that rhetoric. I think any sensible person will recognise that there are fiscal challenges. We're not the US that can maybe afford to be as liberal with some of their fiscal policies as we could be, unfortunately. But I'm not sure the government have done very much to show they're on the side of risk takers, wealth creators, people that want to get on in life. And the UK can and should be one of the leading meritocracies in the world. We don't need to be a leader in everything. We don't need to be the number 4, 5, 6 economy in the world to be successful. But there's some incredibly talented people here, and there are sectors that we can be genuinely world class and world leading in. But that won't happen by accident. It will take decisive policy action to unlock that potential. And as yet, that action has been lacking.
How do you unlock that potential then? What would you like the government to do differently that they've not been doing?
I think it starts with the rhetoric. So there has been, and it's to be fair to them, they're slowly changing this. But when they first came into power, talking about, oh, we've inherited this terrible mess and the economy is a disaster, and I think they quickly realised that what cabinet ministers say has a real impact, and I kind of have slowly started to backtrack from that. So, but it does start with the senior politicians in the country, because they maybe should think about it as a company. That'd be a good start. Demonstrating that there is a belief in growth, there is a belief that this country can compete on the global stage, and then beneath that, articulating a clear plan for where we can win. So talking at a very high level about AI does not achieve anything. It doesn't do anything for anyone on the ground. In my opinion, it's great if you want to host an annual AI seminar or meeting. But in my view, there needs to be far more tangible action taken to say this country can be a leader in the creative sectors, the service sectors, sport, healthcare, biochemistry. There are many areas that we can be leading in. But one, we need to recognise that, and secondly, we need to take real action, whether it's through free enterprise zones, whether it's through certain tax incentives, to encourage the people that can win in those areas to go and take the risk, because there's not a lot of incentive for anyone to take risk right now.
And maybe more private companies in the UK, successful private companies listing on the London Stock Exchange.
Yeah.
Is that in Castor's future?
Well, I'm reluctant to talk about anything to do with the stock exchange, because last time I did, I said to someone that there's no immediate plans for Castor to IPO, and somehow that turned into a headline of Castor prepares for IPO. So to be very clear, there's no immediate plans for us to IPO.
But
equally, as a British entrepreneur, someone that founded a company in the UK, in the north of England, we're very proud to create jobs in the north of England, 500 jobs and counting. It would be brilliant to one day be able to list Castor in the UK, but it's very hard for me to look at the UK market right now and say that is the optimal next step for my business. I don't think there's going to be any single change that is made that alters that impact or that makes it more attractive. It will take time, But at the moment, if I look at what's going on in the US markets, if I look at the private equity markets, if I look at some strategic opportunities we have in the Middle East and the Far East and Asia, it's really hard for me to look in the mirror and say that the UK is the best place for me to grow my business and raise capital. I don't have all the answers. The fact that we're having the conversation is a great start, but the London Stock Exchange should not take for granted that forever it will be the ultimate end goal for British entrepreneurs to list in this country, because I don't think it is anymore.
Well, look at the Issa brothers, of course. They're shareholders in Castore, and they're about to float EG Group on the New York Stock Exchange, about $13 billion float. Are you waiting to see the outcome of that before you make a decision on whether it's going to be London or New York or somewhere else?
No, is the short answer. I mean, Mawson and Zuba have been absolutely fantastic investors for us. It was a real catalyst when they invested in Castore. They challenged us to think bigger, and Phil and I at the time thought that we had these big dreams and ambitions, and Mawson and Zuba came in and said, how do you think bigger, and how can you get there faster, and what can we do to help? And you can't ask for any more from an investor other than to ask those questions. So they've been brilliant for us. EG is a very different business to Castore, a very different stage in its journey. So we're not looking at that. I think what's more interesting is what the London Stock Exchange does, what the government do to try and make it more attractive for companies to list here. Again, I'm not saying there's easy answers, because there isn't, but the status quo clearly is suboptimal. So some changes will need to be made.
Because it would be a shame if Castore was to list outside of the UK.
It would. Equally, I've got a fiduciary and moral duty to shareholders to optimise the value of the business. If you have a global ambition, as we do, particularly in sports where Castore operates, at some point you need to penetrate the US. You can't be a global brand in sports. You can't be a £1 billion turnover company, which is what I would love to get us to in sports, without going into the US. So that market will always be interesting for us. Equally, if I look at what's happening in the Middle East and the investments that are being made in sports in Qatar and Saudi and more broadly across the UAE, if I look at some of the deregulation and changes that are happening in markets like India and China, some very exciting things happening. And the UK, I think this applies both to the government and the LSE, need to understand that they, like all of us, are competing in a global market. The world is becoming ever more interconnected. That is not going to slow down with the ongoing penetration of AI. And unless you, as a country or as a stock exchange, are offering something that is better than other people elsewhere in the world, you're not going to win. That's true for me at Castore, but it's true for the UK government as well.
And of course, you hold a slightly unique job title in the fact that you're co-chief executive of Castore alongside your brother. I'm sure you get along very, very well and see eye to eye on many different things when it comes to Castore, but you must have a difference of opinion every now and again. How do you resolve those differences of opinion?
I just blame him every time something goes wrong.
Is it a brotherly arm wrestle, or?
We don't know any other way. So it's not as if, I remember when Liverpool Football Club went through a period where they tried to have co-managers, and it didn't work out too well. Gerard Houllier and Roy Evans. And that didn't work for many reasons. But when you have a single CEO and then make it a joint CEO, I can understand why that doesn't work well. We've only ever had the two of us right from the beginning, so it would almost be strange if we did ever change that. So it's always felt very natural. There's two big benefits. Firstly, we're brothers, and whatever happens in business, you're going to be brothers at the end of the day. And no matter how well or badly things are going, when you go around to your mum's for Sunday lunch, she'll give you both a clip around the ear if you're arguing about business, and that again, that's something they probably teach at Harvard Business School, but that is a pretty effective strategy for us. So when you've got that innate trust, you being brothers outweighs anything else. It's quite powerful, potent thing to have in business that I suspect not many people do have. And then secondly, we're incredibly lucky that we've got very different skill sets. So in simple terms, my job is to grow revenue and anything that involves growing the business. So international growth, new partnership opportunities, speaking to investors and potential investors. And that's something that I really enjoy doing. And then my brother's job is to make sure that revenue turns into profit and cash flow. So we kind of split our roles quite nicely, don't encroach on each other's turf. And if there are big decisions to be made, which there often are, of course, we'll go for a walk or we'll go for a coffee, we'll debate it, we might disagree, but we'll come to a conclusion. And as soon as that decision is made, there's no you or me, it's we've made the decision and we need to make it work. And that again is quite a powerful factor when you have that decisiveness that I suspect not every business has.
Of course, the Castor Wings are becoming ever more prevalent in the last few years. So you're moving into rugby union. You're in F1, football, also cricket, all sorts of different sports. Is there a sport that you're not currently involved in that you'd like your logo to be associated with in the next few years or so?
So the US sports at the moment, the US market is very different from, well, the UK, but frankly, most other geographies. So in the US, essentially everything is centralized. So you don't do an individual deal with the Miami Dolphins or the Chicago Bears. You do a centralized deal with the NFL, and then which is Nike, and then they kit out every team in that league. So it's not easy to penetrate. What potentially is quite interesting for Castore is the college market, where they will often have 100,000 fans turning up to a college game.
It's massive, isn't it? It's hard to think how big college sport is.
It's
Nobody's
huge.
turning up to high schools in Liverpool to have a look at the basketball team.
Not yet. Let's see what the future holds. But that college market's quite interesting. There's been quite a lot of deregulation within that space that's opened up some interesting commercial opportunities. So the US market is quite interesting to us. I think about it less in terms of sports category and more in terms of geography. So now that we've established a footprint here in the UK, we've established a model that works whereby we can partner with these sports teams. We can help them grow their revenues, help them better connect with their fan bases. That has proven very successful. And through that, it helps us grow our own brand because, as you said, every time Rangers win a football match or Athletic Bilbao win a football match or England cricket, my logo gets visibility, and that is very powerful, authentic marketing for me, which again not many brands can match. Now that model is proven, how we roll it out internationally is a really exciting opportunity for us. There's always a balance between ambition and wanting to go into new markets and discipline and wanting to expand into those markets and execute well, which is not always easy in sport because everything is so emotive. Fans are very emotive, so you need to do it in a very disciplined, well executed way. But how we expand the model into new geographic markets really excites me.
And also, I imagine it's quite a challenge to set your brand up against Nike and Adidas and other brands that are so well established in particular sports teams, particular sports fields. How do you set Castore apart from them? And when you're pitching to a Premier League team or an F1 team, say, well, go with us instead of this more established global brand?
So the first part of that answer, John, is I was really attracted by the high barriers to entry in the market. So I'm 35 years old and I struggle to think of a time in my life that a new brand had entered the sports partnership or sports marketing market, however you want to describe it. So it had really been dominated by the big three and really the big two, Nike and Adidas. And whenever you have a market with those dynamics, standard logic would tell you that there should be quite attractive returns within that market. So maybe it's the egomaniac in me, I don't know. But the fact there were such high barriers to entry, the fact that very few people had even attempted to break into the market is what made it attractive to me. Beyond that, if you have a market that's not really had much innovation, not really had much disruption, there's no real incentive for the incumbents to disrupt themselves or innovate themselves. I think the incumbent's dilemma is the technical phrase, where things worked pretty well for Nike and Adidas. They kind of carved up the market between them. Everyone made money. Teams might move every now and then, but generally each played in their sandbox quite nicely, with the odd exception. So for us to break in, everyone externally thought, wow, that's going to be really difficult. How will you do that? But actually speaking to clubs as an innovative, disruptive challenger really resonated. So there was the brand element and the fact that we are a challenger, we are disruptive, we want to be innovative. We're not the number one, we're not Nike. We know we're not, but we want to knock on the door, we want to challenge those guys. That mindset, that DNA really resonates with a lot of teams, because there's only one team that wins the league each year. Everyone else, by definition, is a challenger. So that brand positioning, challenger mindset really resonated. And then secondly, beyond that, our model is different from the big guys. The big brands are very slow moving. Their supply chains take 18 months to design a product and launch it into the market. The vast majority of their revenue is generated through wholesale channels. We've bought into the market a far more agile approach, where what takes Nike 18 months we'll do in 4 months. And we've bought a far more D2C, digital first approach to the market, which over time has evolved to become very data rich. So we can speak to clubs and not just say, we're a challenger brand like you. We try to innovate, work harder, move more quickly than the big guys. You guys as a football club or a rugby team have a similar mindset, so you've got that brand alignment. But the fact that we could speak to them about data strategy, about selling more directly to fans, about understanding their fan base better, about generating more revenue outside of their home market through that digital platform, all of those things were very different from what the incumbents were talking about. And it's probably a good example of what to many people from the outside looking in looked like the impossible task to disrupt Nike and Adidas. To an entrepreneur, it felt like they were on a perch, and I had a great opportunity to try and knock them off.
Absolutely. We talked a lot about the success of Castore over the last few years or so, but as you know, success is not always a linear, straight line up. Talk to me about the biggest challenges that you have faced, your company's faced over the last few years or so. Is there a particular challenge or a particular mistake that you personally have made that sticks out to you?
How long have you got?
Yeah, as long as you want.
So I think two questions there. Big challenge has been managing the growth of the business and the infrastructure of the organization keeping up with the growth. So our revenue has grown incredibly quickly, which sounds lovely and is very nice. There's worse problems to have in life, first world problem. But building an infrastructure that supports that revenue growth takes time, and it is very hard to forecast 12, 18, 24 months into the future and invest now to build an infrastructure that will support the business for where it will be in the future. That's particularly difficult when you're a stock-led business. We're not there's a strong tech component to what we do. There's a strong data and digital component, but we buy product and there is a cycle of buying that product. So I guess as a very specific example, if I'm forecasting what revenue Red Bull Racing will generate in Mexico, last year they had Checo Perez, a Mexican driver. The revenue in Mexico was significant. this year, Checo Perez is no longer a Red Bull driver. The revenue I'll generate in Mexico will be very different to what it was last year. How you build an infrastructure? Do you have a warehouse in Mexico? Do you invest in a tech platform over there? How do you deal with local taxes and duties? That's become even more prevalent now. There's a new entrant in the White House. But making the investment decisions ahead of time is definitely a challenge. The biggest mistake has been being too slow to build a senior team around you. And again, I hope and believe that isn't due to being egocentric. But when you, as co-founders, when you founded the business together, you're head of marketing, head of sales, head of product, head of design, head of customer service. You deliver the packages to the post office every day. It's cliche, but you do everything. As you grow, it's really hard to give that up, particularly when you've had success, because logically you think this works.
Yeah.
This me being all over every detail and sending emails at 5 a.m. and still sending emails at 10 p.m. and doing phone calls on a Saturday works. So to learn to evolve your leadership style, your management style, so that you bring great people in, but beyond that, trust them to go and do a great job, that isn't easy. And there's consequences to doing it too slowly. So that's been, I would say, the biggest mistake is being too slow in building a great team around you. Thankfully, we've now rectified that mistake.
Yeah. Final question, Tom. Where do you think Castor's going to be in 5 years' time?
Doing more of the same, hopefully. So this is an incredibly competitive market. We've now established ourselves in the market. We've had to take some punches from the big guys, which I love, because I love a challenge. I'm very competitive. And the fact that Nike and Adidas have come after us a little bit shows that we're getting under their skin, which I absolutely love. We have to be a step ahead of them. So I can't beat Nike or Adidas on size or strength. They have a far bigger balance sheet than me. They can pay teams or athletes a lot more money than I can. So I have to constantly out-innovate them, be a speedboat in a market of oil tankers. And I love that. So finding markets that we can think more quickly, that we can innovate more quickly than others, creating products, creating fan experiences, all of those things really excite me. But what excites me more than anything is the same thing that excited me at the beginning, which was the opportunity to build a British sportswear brand that competes on the global stage. That is a reason to get out of bed at 5 o'clock every morning. So we're not there yet, but in 5 years, if we've continued to build on that journey, I will be a very happy man.
Brilliant. Tom, thank you very much for coming on Boardroom Uncovered. Thank you.